Chapter 12. The Shepherd and His Flock. All that spring and summer things went smoothly in the Mutton Hollow neighborhood. The corn was ready to gather, and nothing had happened at the ranch since Mr. Howitt took charge, while the man who appeared to be so strangely in their midst made a large place for himself in the hearts of the simple mountaineers. At first they were disposed to regard him with some distrust, as one part he was so unlike themselves. But when he had changed his dress for the rough garb of the hillsmen, and, meeting them kindly upon their own ground, had entered so readily into their life, the people by common consent dropped the distinguishing title Mr. for the more familiar one of the backwoods, Dad. Not that they lacked in respect or courtesy, it was only their way. And the quiet shepherd accepted the title with a pleasant smile, seeming to find in the change an honor to be received not lightly. But while showing such interest in all that made up their world, the man never opened the door for anyone to enter his past. They knew no more of his history than the hints that he had given Mr. Matthews the night he came out of the mist. At the occasional religious meetings in the schoolhouse of the Forks, Mr. Howitt was always present, an attentive listener to the sermons of the backwoods preacher. And then, seeing his interest, they asked him to talk to them one day when Parson Bigelow failed to make his appointment. "He didn't holler so much as a regular parson," said Uncle Joe Hensley, "but he sure talks so Williams can understand." From that time, they always called upon him at their public gatherings. So the scholar from the world beyond the ridges slipped quietly into the life of the mountain folk and took firm root in their affections. And in his face, so Preachin' Bill said, was the look of one who had fought to fight to a finish, and wore too dead beat to even be glad it wore all over. Between the giant and Mr. Matthew and his shepherd, the friendship begun that night grew always stronger. In spite of the difference in education and training, they found much in common. Some bound of fellowship, unknown to the mountaineer, at least drew them close, and the two men spent many evenings upon the front porch of the log house in quiet talk, while the shadows crept over the valley below, and the light went from the sky back to the clump of pines. From the first, young Matt was strongly drawn to the stranger, who was to have such influence over his life, and Pete said that God lived with Dad Howitt in Mutton Hollow. Pete somehow knew a great deal about God these days. A strange comradeship had come to be between the thoughtful gentleman who cared for the sheep and the ignorant, sorely afflicted, and the nameless backwoods boy. The two were always together, out on the hillside and in the little gleens and valleys, during the day with the sheep or at the ranch in Mutton Hollow, when the flock was safely folded and the night slipped quietly over the timbered ridges. Mr. Howitt had fixed a bunk in his cabin for the boy so that he could come and go at will. Often the shepherd awoke in the morning to find that some time during the night his strange friend had come in from his rovings. Again, after seeing the boy soundly sleeping, the shepherd would arise in the morning to find the bunk empty. Sammy Lane, too, had fallen under the charm of the man with the white hair and the poet's face. Sammy was not so often at the Matthews place after Ollie had gone to the city. The girl could not have been told why. She had a vague feeling that it was better to stay away. But this feeling did not prevent her from climbing the old trail to the lookout on the shoulder of Dewey, and she spent hours at the big rock, looking over the valley to where the smoke from Aunt Molly's kitchen curled above the trees. And sometimes, against the sky, she could see a man and a team moving slowly to and fro the back field of the house. When this happened, Sammy always turned quickly away to where far off of the hills lay like a long, low cloud against the sky. Every week, the girl rode her brown pony to the post office at the Forks, and when she had a letter, things were different. She always stopped then at the Matthews home. One day, when this happened, Dad and Pete were on the ridge above the old trail, just where the north slope of Dewey shades into the rim of the hollow. The elder man was seated on the ground in the shade of an oak, with his back against the trunk of the tree, while the boy lay full length on the soft grass, looking up into the green depths of foliage where a tiny brown bird flitted from bough to bough. In his quaint way, Pete was carrying on a conversation with his little friend in the treetop, translating freely the white for his less gifted but deeply interested companion on the ground below, when Brave, the shepherd dog, lying near, interrupted the talk by a short bark. Looking up, they saw young Matt riding along the summit of the ridge. The young man paused when he heard the dog and caught sight of the two under the tree. Then he came to them and seated himself on the grass at Pete's side. He spoke no word of greeting, and the look on his face was not good to see. Pete's eyes went wide with fear at the manner of his big friend and drew back as if to run. When young Matt, throwing himself over the grass, had hidden his face, a half-sad, half-knowing look came into the lad's delicate features. Reaching forth a hand as slim as a girl's, he stroked the shaggily red-brown head and murmured softly, "Poor Matt, poor Matt. Does it hurt? Is it hurt, Matt? It's better to be by and by." The great form on the grass stirred impatiently. The shepherd spoke no word. He continued, stroking the big head and talking in a low, soothing tones as one would hush a child. "Pete don't know it's hurting young Matt, but he'll be all right someday. Ain't nothing won't grow over after a while, 'cause God says so." Still, the older man was silent. And then the giant burst forth in curses, and the shepherd spoke. "Don't do that, Grant. It's not like you, lad. You cannot help your trouble that way." Young Matt turned over to face his friend. "I know it, Dad," he growled defiantly, "but I just got to say something. I ain't meaning no disrespect to God Almighty, and I reckon he ought to know it, but—" He broke forth again. Pete drew back in alarm. "Look your trouble in the face, lad," said the shepherd. "Don't let it get you down like this." "Look it in the face," roared the other. "Good God, that just it. Ain't I a-looking in the face every day? You don't know about it, Dad. If you did, you'd cuss too." He started in again. "I know more than you think, Grant," said the other, when the big fellow had stopped swearing to get his breath. While he spoke, the shepherd was looking away along the old trail. "There comes your trouble now," he added, pointing to a girl on a brown pony, slowly coming out of the timber near the deer lick. The young man made no reply. Pete, at the sight of the girl, started to his feet, but the big fellow pulled him down again and made the boy understand that he must not betray their position. When Sammy reached the sheep, she checked her pony and searched the hillside with her eyes while her clear call went over the mountain. "Oh, Dad." Young Matt shook his head savagely at his companion, and even Brave was held silent by a low, "Be still," from his master. Again Sammy looked carefully on every side, but laying on the higher ground and partly hidden by the trees, the little group could not be seen. When there was no answer to her second call, the girl drew a letter from her pocket and, permitting the pony to roam at will, proceeded to read. The big man, looking on, cursed again under his breath. "It's from Ollie," he whispered to his companions. "She's stopped at the house. He says his uncle will give me a job in the shops, and that it'll be fine for me, 'cause Ollie will be my boss himself. He my boss. My dad burn his sneaking little soul, I could crunch him with one hand. I see him in hell before I take orders from him. I told her so, too," he finished savagely. "And what did she say?" asked the shepherd quietly, his eyes on the girl below. "Just said kind of short like that she reckoned I could. Then I come away." The girl finished her letter and, after another long call for Dad, moved on over the shoulder of the mountain. Pete, who had withdrawn a little way from his companions, was busily talking in his strange manner to his unseen friends. Then young Matt opened his heart to the shepherd and told him all. It was the old story. And, as Mr. Howitt listened, dreams that he had thought dead with the death of his only son stirred again in his heart, and his deep voice was vibrant with emotion as he sought to comfort the lad who had come to him. While they talked, the sun dropped until its lower edge touched the top of the tallest pine on Wolf Ridge, and the long shadows lay over the valley below. "I'm mighty sorry I let go and cuss, Dad," finished the boy, "but I keep holding in until I'm plumb wild, and something happens like that letter, and I go out on the range and bust. I've often wished you've knowed. It seems like you're just a knowing about it will help me to hold on. Get scared of myself sometimes, Dad. I do, honest." "I'm glad, too, you have told me, Grant. Means more to me than you can guess. I had a boy once, you know. He was like you. He would have come to me this way if he had lived." The sheep had begun working towards the lower ground. The shepherd rose to his feet. "Take them home, Brave. Come on, boys. You must eat with me at the ranch tonight." Then the three friends, the giant mountaineer and the strangely afflicted youth, and the old scholar went down the mountainside together. As they disappeared into the timber on the lower level, the bushes, near which they had been sitting, parted silently, and a man's head and shoulders appeared from behind a big rock. The man watched the strange companions out of sight. Then the bushes swayed together, and the mountains seemed to have swallowed him up. The three friends had just finished their supper when Pete saw Sammy entering the ranch clearing. Young Matt caught up his hat. At the rear door, he paused. "I've got to go now, Dad," he said awkwardly. "I can't see her any more today. But if you'll let me, I'll come again when things get too hot." The shepherd held out his hand. "I understand. Come, always, my boy." The big fellow with Pete skipped away into the timber at the rear of the cabin, a moment before Sammy appeared at the open door in front. Chapter 13. Sammy Lane's Ambition. "Law sakes," cried Sammy, looking at the table. "You didn't use all them dishes, did you, Dad? You sure must eat a lot." "Oh, I eat enough," laughed Mr. Howitt, "but it happens that I had company this evening. Young Matt and Pete were here for supper. He brought 2 chairs outside the cabin." "Shucks," exclaimed Sammy, as she seated herself and removed her sunbonnet. "They must have eaten and run. Wish I'd gotten here sooner. Young Matt run away from me this afternoon. I wanted to see him about Mandy Ford's party next week. I done promised Mandy that I'd bring him. I reckon he'd go with me if I asked him." "There is not the least doubt about that," observed the man. "I'm sure anyone would be glad for such charming company." The girl looked up suspiciously. "Are you a-jokin'?" she said. "Indeed, I am not. I am very much in earnest." Then, taking a cob pipe from his pocket, he added, politely, "May I smoke?" "Huh? Oh, law, yes. What'd you ask me for?" She watched him curiously as he filled and lighted the pipe. "I reckon that's because you was raised in the city." He added slowly, "Folks smoke here sometimes, do they not?" he returned between puffs. "I don't mean that. Course they smoke and chew, too. And the woman diff snuff, some of 'em. Aunt Molly Matthews don't, though, and I ain't never going to, 'cause she don't. But nobody don't ask me if they can. They just go ahead. That ain't the only way you're different from us, though," she continued, looking at Mr. Howitt with that wide, questioning gaze. "You're a different a heap o' ways. 'Tain't that you wears different clothes, for you don't no more. nor 'tain't like you act like you were any better'n us. I just don't know what it is, but it's something. Take your staying here in Mutton Hollow now, honest, Dad. Ain't you afeard to stay here all alone at nights?" "Afraid? Afraid of what?" He looked at her curiously. "Haunts," said the girl, lowering her voice. "Down there." She pointed down towards the old ruined cabin under the bluff. "She's sure been seen there. What if he was to come too, Dad? Don't you believe in haunts?" The shepherd's face was troubled as he answered, "I don't know, Sammy. I scarcely know what I believe. Some marvelous experiences are related by apparent reliable authorities, but I have always said that I could not accept the belief. I am not so sure now. After all, the unseen world is not so very far away. Strange forces of which we know nothing are about us everywhere. I dare not say that I do not believe. But you ain't scared. Why should I fear?" Sammy shook her head. "Ain't another man or woman in the whole country would dash spend the night here, Dad, except Pete, of course. Not even young Matt nor my daddy would do it. And I don't guess that they're afraid of anything. Anything that's alive, I mean. You're sure different, Dad, plumb different. I reckon it must be the city that does it. And that's what I've come to see you about this evening. You see, Ollie's been a-telling me a lot about folks and things way over there." She waved her hand towards the ridges that shut in the hollow. "Ollie, he's changed a heap himself since he went there to live. I got a letter today, and when I went home, I hunted up the first one he wrote, and I can tell you there's a right smart difference already. You know all about Ollie and me going to get married, I reckon." Mr. Howitt admitted that he had heard something of that nature, and Sammy nodded. "I lowered, you know, but you don't know how mightily proud and peculiar Ollie always is. I fear that being in the city with all them one folk ain't gonna make him any less than the way than he was. And if he stays there and keeps on a-changin', and I stay here, and I don't change none, why, it might be that I... She faltered and came to a dead stop, twisting her bonnet strings nervously in her confusion. "Ollie, he ain't like young Matt nohow," she said again. "Such as that wouldn't make no difference with him, but Ollie... Well, you see..." There was a twinkle now in the shepherd's eye as he answered, "Yes, I see. I am quite sure that I see." The girl continued, "You know about all these things, Dad, and there ain't nothing nobody else here that does. Will you learn me to be a sure enough lady so Ollie won't... So he won't..." Again she paused in confusion. It was evident from the look on Mr. Howitt's face that whatever he saw, it was not this. "I somehow feel like I could do it if I had a chance," she murmured. There was no answer. After a time, Sammy stole a look from her quiet companion. What could the man in the chair be thinking about? His pipe was neglected, his gray head bowed. "Of course," said the young woman, with just a little lifting of her chin. "Of course, if I couldn't never learn, there ain't use to try." The old scholar raised his head and looked long at the girl. Her splendid form, glowing with the rich life and strength of the wilderness, showed in every line proud old Southern blood. Could she learn to be a fine lady? Mr. Howitt thought of the woman of the cities, pale, sickly, colorless, hothouse posses beside this mountain flower. What would this beautiful creature be had she their training? What would she gain? What might she not lose? Aloud he said, "My dear child, do you know what it is that you ask?" Sammy hung her head, abashed at his serious tone. "I lowed it'd be right smart trouble for you," she said, "but I could let you have Brownie in pay. He ain't only 5-year-old, and he is as sound as a button." He's all I've got, Mr. Howitt, but I'd be mighty proud to swap him to you." My girl, said the shepherd, "you misunderstand me. I did not mean it like that. It would be a pleasure to teach you. I was thinking how little you realize what the real life of the city is like, and how much you have that the fine ladies, as you call them, would give fortunes for, and how little they have after all that could add one ray of brightness to your life." Sammy laughed aloud as she cried, "Me got anything that anybody would want? Why, Dad, I ain't got nothing but Brownie and my saddle, and that's all. I sure ain't got nothing to lose." The man smiled in sympathy. Then slowly a purpose formed in his mind. "And if you should lose, you will never blame me," he said at last. "Never, never," she promised eagerly. "All right, it is a bargain. I will help you." The girl sprang to her feet. "I knew you would, I plumb sure you would," she cried, fairly quivering with her life and excitement. "It's got to be a sure enough lady, Dad. I want to be a truly fine lady, like them Ollie tells about in his letters, you know." "Yes, Sammy, I understand. A sure enough lady, and we will do it, I am sure. But it will take a great deal of hard work on your part, though." "I reckon it will," she returned soberly, coming back to her seat. Then drawing in her chair a little closer, she leaned towards her teacher. "Begin now," she commanded. "Tell me what I must do first." Mr. Howitt carefully searched his pockets for a match and lighted his pipe again before he said, "First, you must know what a sure enough lady is. You see, Sammy, there are several kinds of women who call themselves ladies, but are not real ladies after all. And they all look very much like the sure enough kind. That is, they look like them to most people." Sammy nodded. "Just like them Thompsons down by Flat Rock. They're all mighty proud 'cause they come from Illinois the same as the Matthews. You would think to hear 'em that old Matt couldn't near run the ranch without 'em, and some folks, strangers like, might believe it. But we all know they ain't nothing but just low-down trash all the time, and no better than some of them folks over on the bend." The shepherd smiled. "Something like that. I see you understand. Now, a real lady, Sammy, is a lady in 3 ways. First, in her heart. I mean just to herself, and the things that no one but she could ever know. A sure enough lady does not pretend to be. She is." Again the girl broke in eagerly. "That's just like Aunt Molly, ain't it? Couldn't no one ever have a finer lady heart than her?" "Indeed, you are right," agreed the teacher heartedly. "And that is the thing that lies at the bottom of it all, Sammy. The lady heart comes first." "I won't never forget that," she returned. "I couldn't forget Aunt Molly nohow. Tell me more, Dad." "Next, the sure thing lady must have a lady mind. She must know how to think and talk about all the things that really matter. All the fine dresses and jewels in the world can't make a real lady if she does not think, or if she only thinks of all the things that are of no value. Do you see?" Again the girl nodded, and with a knowing smile answered quickly, "I know a man like that, and I see now that that is what makes him so different from other folks. It's the things he thinks about all to himself that does it. But I've got a heap to learn. I sure have. I could read all right if I had something to read, and I reckon I could learn to talk like you if I tried hard enough. What else is there?" Then continued the shepherd, "A lady will keep her body as strong and as beautiful as she can, for this is one way she expresses her heart and mind. Do you see what I mean?" Sammy answered slowly, "I reckon I do." "You mean I mustn't get stooped over and thin-chested and go slouching around like so many of the girls and women around here do. I mustn't let my clothes go without buttons, 'cause I am in a hurry, and I must always comb my hair and keep my hands as white as I can. Is that it?" "That's the idea," said the shepherd. Sammy gazed ruefully at a large rent in her skirt and at her shoe half-laced. Then she put a hand up to her tumbled hair. "I didn't think it made any difference when only home folks was around," she says. "That's just it, my child," said the old man gently. "I think a sure enough lady would look after these things whether there was anyone to see her or not, just for herself, you know. And this is where you can begin. I will send for some books right away, and when they come we will begin to train your mind." "But the heart, how will I get a lady's heart, Dad?" "How does the violet get its perfume, Sammy? Where does the rose get its color? How does the bird learn to sing its song?" For a moment she was puzzled. Then her face lighted. "I see," she exclaimed. "I'm just going to catch it from folks like Aunt Molly and someone else I know. I'm just to be, not to make believe or let on like I was, but to be a real lady inside. And then I'll learn how to talk and look like I know myself to be." She drew a long breath as she rose to go. "It'll be mighty hard, Dad, in some ways, but it'll sure be worth it when I get all among the folks. I'm mighty thankful to you, I sure am. I sure hope you won't never be sorry you promised to help me." As the girl walked swiftly away through the thickening dusk of the evening, the shepherd watched her out of sight, then turned towards the corral for the last look at the sheep to see that all was right for the night. "Brave old fellow," he said to the dog who trotted by his side. "We are going to make another mistake, do you think? We have made so many, you know." Brave looked up into the master's face and answered with his low bark, as though to declare his confidence. "Well, well, old dog, I hope you are right. The child has a quick mind and a good heart and, if I'm not mistaken, good blood. We shall see. We shall see." Suddenly the dog whirled about, the hair on his back bristling as he gave a threatening growl. A man on a dun-colored mule was coming up the road. Chapter 14. The Common Yeller Kind. Mr. Howitt stood quietly by the corral gate when the horseman rode up. It was Wash Gibbs on his way home from an all-day visit with his friends on the river. When the big mountaineer took the short cut through Mutton Hollow, he thought to get well past the ranch before the light failed. No matter how well fortified with the courage distilled by his friend Jennings, the big man would never have taken the trail by the old ruined cabin alone after dark. He had evidently been riding at a good pace, for the mule's neck and flanks were wet with sweat. Gibbs himself seemed greatly excited, and one hand rested on the pistol on his hip as he pulled up in front of the shepherd. Without returning Mr. Howitt's greeting, he pointed towards the two empty chairs in front of the house, demanding roughly, "Who was that with you before you heard me comin'?" "Sammy Lane was here a few minutes ago," replied the shepherd. Gibbs uttered an oath. "She was she? Well, who was the man?" "There was no man," returned the other. "Young Matt and Pete were here for supper, but they went as soon as the meal was finished before Sammy came." "Don't you try to lie to me," exclaimed the big man with another burst of language and a threatening movement with the hand that rested on the pistol. Mr. Howitt was startled. Never in his life before had such words been addressed to him. He managed to reply with quiet dignity, "I have no reason for deceiving you, or anyone else, Mr. Gibbs. There has been no man here but myself, since Matt and Pete left after supper." The shepherd's manner carried conviction, and Gibbs hesitated, evidently greatly perplexed. During the pause, Brave growled again and faced towards the cliff below the corral, his hair bristling. "What's the matter with that dog?" said Gibbs, turning uneasy in his saddle to face in the direction the animal was looking. "What is it, Brave?" said Mr. Howitt. The only answer was an uneasy whine, followed by another growl, all of which said plainly in dog talk, "I don't know what it is, but there's something over there in that cliff that I don't like." "It must be some animal," said the shepherd. "Ain't no animal that makes a dog act like that. Did anybody pass while you was a-sitting there just before I come in sight?" "Not a soul," said the other. "Did you meet somebody down the road?" The big man looked at the shepherd hard before he answered, in a half-frightened, half-bullying tone. "I'd seed something in the road yonder, and it disappeared right by the old shack under the bluffs." He twisted around in his saddle again, facing the cliff with its dense shadows and dim twilight forms, as he muttered, "If I was only right sure I'd—" Then, swinging back, he leaned towards the man on the ground. "Look-a-here, mister. There's them lows, there's some things in this here holler to be afeared of, and I reckon it's so. There's some sure hell to pay there at the cabin down yonder. I ain't a-saying what hit was I seed, but if it were anywhere else, I'd say it was a man. But if it was a man, I don't know why you didn't see him when you come past, or else you're a lying. I just wanted to tell you, you're right smart of a stranger in these here parts, even if you have been a-working for old Matt all summer. You're to blame careful about talking about yourself, or telling where you come from, to suit some folks. Some strangers all right, and again some ain't. But we don't aim to have nobody in this here neighborhood what jumps into the bush when they see an honest man a-comin'." After he finished speaking, Gibbs straightened himself in the saddle, and before Mr. Howitt could reply, the dun mule at the touch of the spur had dashed away up the road in the direction taken by Sammy Lane. It was quite dark in the heavy timber of the hollow by the time Sammy had reached the edge of the open ground on the hillside, but once on the higher level, clear of the trees, the strong glow of the western sky still lighted the way. From here, it was not too far to the girl's home, and as she climbed to a spur of Dewey, Sammy saw the cabin and heard distinctly the sweet strain of her father's violin. On the top of the rise, the young woman paused a moment to enjoy the beauties of the evening, which seemed to come to her with a new meaning that night. She stood there, with her strong young figure was clearly outlined against the sky to the man who was riding swiftly along the road over which she had just passed. Sammy turned when she heard the quick beating of the mule's feet. Then, recognizing the huge form of the horseman as he came out of the woods into the light, she started quickly away towards her home. But the mule and its rider were soon beside her. "Howdy, Sammy." Gibbs leaped from the saddle and with the brittle rein over his arms came close to the girl. "Fine evening for a walk." "Howdy," returned the young woman coolly, quickening her pace. "You needn't be in such a powerful hurry," growled Wash. "If you've got time to talk that old cuss at the ranch, you got time to talk to me." Sammy turned angrily. "You better get back on your mule and go about your business, Wash Gibbs. When I want you to walk with me, I'll let you know." "That's all right, honey," exclaimed the other insolently. "I'm a-going your way just the same, and we'll mosey along together. I was going home, but I've got business with your pa now." "Worst thing for Daddy, too," flashed the girl. "I wish you would stay away from him." Wash laughed. "Your daddy couldn't keep the house, though, without me nohow. Who was that feller talking with you, the old man down yonder?" "There wasn't nobody talking to us," replied Sammy shortly. "That's what he said, too," growled Gibbs, "but I sure seed somebody sneaking into the brush when I rode up. I thought, when I was down there, that hit might o' been a haunt, but I know hit was a man now. There's something mighty funny going on around here since that feller come into the neighborhood, and he'll sure find something in Mutton Holler more alive than old Matt's gal if he ain't careful." The girl caught her breath quickly. She knew the big ruffian's methods, and with good reason feared for her old friend, should he even unconsciously incur the giant's displeasure. As they rode near the house, Wash continued, "Young Matt, he was there too. Let me tell you, I ain't forgot about his big show at the mill last spring. He'll have to do a heap more better'n he done then when I get around to him." Sammy laughed scornfully. "'Pears like you ain't been in no hurry to try it on. I ain't heard of young Matt leaving the country yet. You better stay away from Jennings still, though, when you do try it." Then, while the man was tying his mule to the fence, she ran to the cabin to greet her father with a hysterical sob that greatly astonished Jim. Before explanations could be made, a step was heard approaching the door, and Sammy had just the time to say, "Wash Gibbs," in answer to her father's inquiring looks. When the big man entered, Mr. Lane arose to hang his violin on its peg. "Don't stop for me, Jim," said the newcomer. "Just let her go. Me and Sammy have been having a nice little walk, and some right pert music would sound mighty fine." Gibbs was angered beyond reason at Sammy's last words, or he would have exercised greater care. Sammy's father made no reply until the girl had left the room. But whatever it was that his keen eye read in his daughter's face, it made him turn to his guest with anything but a cordial manner, and there was that in his voice that should have warned the other. "So you and Sammy went on a walk, did you?" "She was coming home from the sheep ranch, and I caught up with her," explained Gibbs. "I 'lowed how she needed company, so I came along. I seemed to be about as welcome as usual," he added with an ugly grin. "Meanin', my girl didn't want your company and told you so?" asked the other softly. Wash answered with a scowl. "Sammy's getting too dag-bun good for me since Ollie's uncle took him in. And now this here old man from nowhere's come. It's worse than ever. She'll put up a rope around our necks the first thing you know." Jim's right hand slipped quietly inside his hickory shirt, where the button was missing, as he drawled, "My girl always was too good for some folks, and it's about time you was finding it out. She can't help it. She was born that way. She's got mighty good blood in her veins, that girl has. I don't aim to ever let it be mixed up with none of them low-down common yeller kind." The deliberate purpose of the speaker was too evident to be mistaken. The other man's hand flew up to his hip almost before Mr. Lane had finished his sentence, but Wash was not quick enough. Like a flash, Jim's hand was withdrawn from inside the hickory shirt, and the giant looked squarely into the muzzle of Jim Lane's ever-ready murderous weapon. In the same voice, without the slightest allusion to the unfinished movement of the other, Mr. Lane continued, "I done told you before that my girl would pick her own company, and I ain't never feared for a minute that she'd take up with such as you. Ollie Stewart ain't so mighty of a man maybe, but he's clean, he is, and the stock's pretty good. Now you can just listen to me, or you can mosey out that door, and the next time we meet we'll settle it for good, without any further arrangement." As Sammy's father talked, the big figure of the visitor relaxed, and when Jim had finished his slow speech, Wash was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped in front. "We ain't got no call to fight now, Jim," he said in a tone of respect. "We've got something else to think about. That's what I've come here for tonight. I don't aim till I seed what I did at the ranch down yonder. I tell you, it's time we was a-doing something." At this, Mr. Lane's face and manner changed quickly. He put up his weapon, and the two men drew their chairs close together, as though death had not a moment before stretched forth his hand to them. For an hour they sat talking in low tones. Sammy in the next room had heard the conversation up to this point, but now only an occasional word reached her ears. Gibbs seemed to be urging some action, and her father was vigorously protesting. "I tell you, Jim, it's the only safe way. You didn't used to be so squeamish." Several times the old shepherd was mentioned, and also the stranger whom Wash had seen that evening, and once the trembling girl heard young Matt's name. At length the guest rose to go, and Mr. Lane walked with him to the gate. Even after the big man was mounted, the conversation still continued, Wash still urging, and Jim still protesting. When his visitor was gone, Mr. Lane came slowly back to the house. Extinguishing the light, he seated himself in the open doorway and filled his pipe. Sammy caught the odor of tobacco, and a moment later Jim heard a light, quick step on the floor behind him. Then 2 arms went around his neck. "What is it, Daddy? What is it? Why don't you drive that man away?" "Did you hear us talking?" asked the man, an anxious note in his voice. "I heard you talking about him pestering me. But after that, you didn't talk so loud. What is the matter, Daddy, that he could stay and be so thick with you after all the things you said? I was sure he'd make you kill him." Jim laughed softly. "You're just like your mother, girl. Just like her, with the old blood a-backing you up." Then he asked a number of questions about Mr. Howitt and her visit to the ranch that evening. As Sammy told her of her ambition to fit herself for the place that would be hers when she was married, and repeating the things that Mr. Howitt had told her, explained how the shepherd had promised to help, Jim expressed his satisfaction and delight. "I knowed you was a-studying about something, girl," he said, "but I didn't say nothing 'cause I 'lowed you'd tell me when you got ready." "I didn't want to say nothing till I was sure, you see," replied the daughter. "I aimed to tell you as soon as I got home tonight, but Wash Gibbs didn't give me no chance." The man held her close. "Dad Howitt sure puts the thing just right, Sammy. There'll be old times come back when you're a lady in your own house with all your fine friends around, and you'll do it, girl. You sure will. Don't never be afraid to bank on the old blood. It'll see you through." And his voice broke. "You won't never be lured away from your old daddy, will you, honey? Will you always stand by Daddy like you do now? Will you let me and young Matt slip around once in a while just to look at you all so fine?" "Daddy Jim, if you don't hush, I'll... She hid her face on his shoulder. There, honey. I was only a human. You'll always be my Sammy, the only boy I ever had. You just naturally couldn't be nothing else." Long after his daughter had gone to her room and to her bed, the mountaineer sat in the doorway, looking into the dark. He heard the short bark of a fox in the brush back of the stable, and the wild cry of a catamount from a cliff further down the mountain was answered by another from the timber below the spring. He saw the great hills heaving their dark forms into the sky. In his soul he felt the spirit of the wilderness and the mystery of the hour. At last he went into the house to close and bar the door. Away down in Mutton Hollow a dog barked, and high up in Old Dewey, near Sammy's lookout, a spot of light showed for a moment, then vanished. Chapter 15. The Party at Ford's. Young Matt would have found some excuse for staying at the house the night of the party at Ford's, but the shepherd said he must go. The boy felt that the long evening with Sammy would only hurt. He reasoned with himself that it would be better for him to see as little as possible of the girl who was to marry Ollie Stewart. Nevertheless, he was singing as he saddled the big white-faced sorrel to ride once more over the trail that nobody knows how old. Mr. Lane was leading the brown pony from the stable as young Matt rode up to the gate, and from the doorway of the cabin Sammy called to say that she would be ready in a minute. "Ain't seen you in a coon's age, boy," said Jim, while they were waiting for the girl. Why don't you never come down to the old trail no more?" Big fellow's face reddened as he answered, "I ain't been nowhere, Jim. 'Pears like I just can't get away from the place no more. We're that busy." Sammy's father looked at his young neighbor squarely in the eye with that peculiar searching gaze. "Looky here, Grant. I've knowed you ever since you was born, and you ought to know me a little. 'Tain't your way to dodge, and 'tain't mine. I reckon you know you're welcome as always, don't you?" Young Matt returned the other's look fairly. "I ain't never doubted it, Jim. But things is a heap different now, since it all done and settled with Ollie gone." The two understood each other perfectly. Said Jim, drawing a long breath, "Well, I wish you'd come over just the same anyways. Can't do nobody no harm as I can see." "Wouldn't do me no good," replied the young man. "Maybe not," assented Jim, "but I'd like mightily well to have you come just the same." Then he drew closer to his young friend. "I've been aiming to ride over and see you, Matt, but Sammy said you was a-comin' to this evening, and I 'lowed this would be soon enough. I reckon you know what Wash Gibbs is a-tellin' he aims to do first chance he gets." The giant drew himself up with a grim smile. "I've heard a good bit, Jim, but you don't need to mind about me. I know I ain't quite grow, but I'm a-growin'." The older man surveyed the great form of the other with a critical eye as he returned. "Darn if I don't believe you'd push him mighty close, if you'd only play fair, but I'd load you ought to know it was a-comin'." "I have known it for a long time," said the other cheerfully, "but I heard Preachin' Bill say once that if a feller don't fuss about what he knows for sure, the things he don't know ain't got apt to bother him none. It's this here guessin' that sure gets a man down. Preachin' Bill hits it every pop, don't he?" explained Jim admirably. "But there's something else you ought to know too, Matt. Wash has done made his threats agin the old man down there." "You mean Dad Howitt," said young Matt sharply. "What's Wash got agin Dad, Jim?" Mr. Lane shifted uneasily. "Some full notion of his'n. You mind old man Lewis, I reckon?" The big man's muscles tightened. "Dad told us about his stopping at the ranch the other night. Wash Gibbs better keep his hands off of Mr. Howitt. I ain't told nobody about this, Grant, and you can do as you like about telling your father and the old man. If anything happens, get word to me, quick." Before more could be said, Sammy appeared in the doorway, and soon the two young people were riding on their way. Long after they had passed from sight in the depth of the forest, the dark mountaineer stood at the big gate, looking in the direction that they had gone. Young Matt was like a captive tugging at his bonds. Mr. Lane's word had stirred the fire, and the girls present by his side added fuel to the flame. He could not speak. He dared not even look at her, but rode with his eyes fixed upon the ground where the sunlight fell in long bars of gold. Sammy, too, was silent. She felt something that was strangely like fear when she found herself alone with her big neighbor. Now and then she glanced timidly up at him and tried to find some word with to break the silence. She half wished that she had not come. So they rode together through the lights and shadows down into the valley, the only creatures in all the free life of the forest who were not free. At last the girl spoke. "It's mighty good of you to take me over the Mandy's tonight. There ain't no one else I could have gone with." There was no reply, and Sammy seemed not to notice, continued talking in a matter-of-fact tone that soon, for such is the way of a woman, won him from his mood, and the two chatted away like the good comrades they had always been. Just after they had crossed Fall Creek at Slick Rock Ford, some 2 miles below the mill, young Matt leaned from his saddle and for a little ways studied the ground carefully. When he sat erect again, he remarked, with the air of one who had reached a conclusion, Wouldn't wonder but there'll be some doings at Ford's tonight, sure enough. There's sure to be, returned the girl. Everyone will be there. Andy's folks from over at Long Creek are coming, and some from the mouth of the James. Andy wanted Daddy to play for her, but he says he can't play for parties no more, and that they got that old fiddling Jake from the Flag neighborhood, I guess. There'll be something a heap more exciting than the fiddling and the dancing according to my guess, returned young Matt. What do you mean? Asked Sammy. Her escort pointed to the print of a mule's shoe in the soft soil on the low-bottomed land. That there's Wash Gibbs' dun mule, and he's headed down the creek for Jennings still. Wash will meet a lot of his gang from over on the river, and like's not, they'll go on from there to the party. I wish your dad was going to do the playing tonight. It was full dark before they reached the Ford clearing. The faint, far-away sound of a violin, seeming strange and out of place in the gloomy solitude of the great woods, first told them the other guest had already arrived. Then, as they drew nearer, the tones of the instrument grew louder. They could hear the rhythmic swing and the beat of heavily shod feet upon the rough floorboards, with the shrill cries of the caller and the half-savage, half-pathetic sing-song of the backwoods dancers singing Missouri Gal. Reaching the edge of the clearing, they voluntarily checked their horses, stopping just within the shadow of the timber. Here, the sound of the squeaking fiddle, the shouting caller, the stamping feet, and the swinging dancers came with full force, and through the open door and windows of the log house, they could see the wheeling, swaying figures of coatless men and calico-gowned women, while the light streaming out opened long lanes in the dusk. About 10 of them in the forest dead, standing in groups under trees, were the shadowy forms of saddled horses and mules, tied by their brittle reins to the lower branches, and nearer to the cabin, 2 or 3 teams, tied to the rail fence, stood hitched to big wagons in which they were splint-bottomed chairs for extra seat. During the evening, the men tried in their rough, good-natured way to joke young Matt about taking advantage of Ollie Stewart's absence. But they very soon learned that, while the big fellow was ready to enter heartily in all the fun of the occasion, he would not receive as just any allusion to his relation to the girl, whom he had escorted to the party. Sammy, too, when her big companion was not near, suffered from the cruel wit of her friends. Ollie Stewart don't own me yet, she declared with a toss of the head, when someone threatened to right her absent lover. No, replied one of her tormentors, but you ain't aiming to miss your old chance of going to the city to live with them big bugs. In the laugh that followed, Sammy was claimed by a tall woodsman for the next dance, and escaped to take her place on the floor. Well, Ollie'll sure make a good man for her, remarked another joker. If he don't walk the chalk, she can take him cross her knee and wallop him. She'll sure marry him, all right, said the first, 'cause he's got the money, but she's gonna have a heap o' fun making young Matt play the fool before she leaves the woods. He ain't take his eyes off her tonight. Everyone's laughing at him. I notice they take good care to laugh behind his back, flashed the little black-eyed Annie Brooke from the Cove neighborhood. Young Matt, who had been dancing with Mandy Ford, came up behind the group just in time to hear their remarks. 2 or 3 who saw him within hearing tried to warn the speakers. While everyone around them saw the situation, the 2 men caught the frantic signals of their friend too late. The music suddenly stopped. The dancers were still. By instinct, every eye in the room was fixed upon the little group as the jokers turned to face the object of their jest. The big mountaineer took one long step towards the 2 who had spoken, his brow dark with rage, his huge fist clenched. But Even as his powerful muscles contracted for the expected blow, the giant came to a dead stop. Slowly, his arm relaxed. His hand dropped to his side. Then, turning deliberately, he walked to the door, the silent crowd parting to give him way. As the big man stepped from the room, a gasp of astonishment escaped from the company. The two jokers, with frightened faces, broke into a shrill, nervous laughter. Then a buzz of talk went around. The fiddlers struck up again, the callers shouted, and the dancers stamped and bowed and swung their partners as they sung. And out in the night under the trees, at the edge of the gloomy forest, the strongest man in the hills was saying over and over to the big, white-faced Earl, "I don't dare to do it. I don't dare. Dad Howitt wouldn't. He sure wouldn't." Very soon, two figures left the house and hurried towards a bunch of saddle horses nearby. They had untied their animals and were about to mount when suddenly a huge form stepped from the shadows to their horses' heads. "Put up your guns, boys," said young Matt calmly. "I reckon you'd know that if I wanted trouble, it would have been all over before this." The weapons were not drawn, as the big man continued. "Dad Howitt is a feller always whips himself every time he fights when there ain't no principle involved. I don't guess Dad would say our principle in this, 'cause there might be some truth in what your boy said. I reckon I am something a playin' a fool. Would have been a heap of safer for you to let folks find it out for themselves." "We were only just foolin', Matt," muttered one. "That's all right," returned the big fellow. "But you better tie up again and go back into the house and dance a while longer. Folks might think you were scared if you was to leave so soon."